when you're in its presence, takes you back to those days. On one side, the sign says, Uncle Abe, we will not forget you. The other side is, our country shall be one country. The promise that we shall be a united country. Our hope is that the exhibit will challenge people, offer hope to people, and encourage people to take steps to move us closer to that day when we are one country. There are, trying to think, there are slave bracelets. There's a slave-made brick from the original White House from 1792. There are a number of just pieces of art that are stunningly beautiful and contrasted with signs from the Jim Crow era that indicate whites only or for colored. It's a whole range of history and the cultural experience that African Americans have faced.
How did you start assembling the collection, number one, and what did it grow into? I bet you, this is my sense, I bet you that you found a piece, then another, and then before too long, this collection started speaking to you.
Exactly.
And identifying itself. Diane, what do you think?
Well, it was almost 30 years ago, and a friend of mine came over. We had 4 children at home, and a friend of mine came over to the house. We had a very contemporary house with shag carpeting and 2 Andy Warhols on the wall. And she said, "Where's your African American history and art for your 4 children?" And I said, "Well, I don't know where it exists. I don't know where to find it." And so she left and came back a couple days later with a small box that she had gotten from an interior decorator friend, Dorothy Robb, who had grown up in the South. And it was her childhood memento box. And she had some little African American rag dolls and a couple pencils and a couple Paul Laurence Dunbar books. And Paul Laurence Dunbar was the beginning 30 years ago of our collection, because I had never heard of Paul Laurence Dunbar, and I got into his poetry, the dialectic. I loved the dialectic. I always think that was the beginnings of rap music. So I started collecting Paul Laurence Dunbar books, and then I would find a piece of art, and the collection started snowballing, and Alan got involved, and we started antiquing together. And now 30 years later, we've amassed this collection. But the exhibit, actually, it was installed yesterday. I hope all your listeners will have a chance to get down and see it. It's at the Cargill Hall in the Minneapolis Public Library. And it'll be up through Super Bowl week and over Martin Luther King Jr. birthday. And it will be taken down February 6th. And so we have one month to check it out, but it's very, Georgie was down yesterday, and there was a steady flow of people the entire day on the first opening day, and she said people were really moved.
That's great. Georgie, what do you think? What was your impression of it? First of all, good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Shout out to Celine.
She'll be happy.
Yeah. I really had a hard time separating myself from the collection, having lived with it all of these years.
I'm imagining that you and the collection grew up together.
We kind of did. Yeah, the collection definitely evolved. I mean, it started with just a few items, and then it got bigger, and it got bigger in scope as well. And so now it's another kind of incarnation or expression where we're telling a small part of the story of the collection, really, because it's a huge collection, and this is just a narrative that we were able to extract from it that we felt like was really relevant to today, to grounding some of the conversations that are happening broadly about racial injustice and Black Lives Matter, and then also with the Super Bowl coming to town, is kind of, it feels like that conversation is a little bit unfinished. So it connects to that as well. And it feels like people, you know, the fact that the interest level was so high on that first day, and even before we opened, there were people kind of knocking on the glass, like, you know, wanting to come in and really eager to see it. And I think it just shows that people are still trying to find a way to ground themselves and go, you know, find out how to go forward. So yeah, it was really great to see people come in and be eager to see it and eager to engage with the material.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane, my guest in studio, retired Justice Alan Page, his wife Diane Sims Page, and their daughter Georgina Page Smith, here to talk about the project, the exhibit, and the speech, the talk. Testify. It's not about the flag or the anthem. It's about justice. And this exhibit opened yesterday and will continue through February 6th. And the event in which Justice Page will speak will be Wednesday, January 31st, 2 to 4 p.m. at Hennepin County Library. That's the Minneapolis Central Library at 300 Nicollet Mall downtown. That's where the exhibit is as well, right?
Yes. And we also have an opening reception on Thursday, which is going to be fantastic, from 7 to 8.
And you're all invited,
Yeah,
right? We want
invited.
everybody. Yeah.
There'll be live music and snacks.
So, you know, Justice Page, the question becomes, how much of this collection would you say is personal? Let me preface it with my story. I've said this before, but I think it'll resonate with you. When I went to see 12 Years a Slave, I came back home from watching the film, and I noticed this photograph that had been on the mantle in my dining room for about 50 years or 40 years, however long I lived there, that's where the picture had been. I am 4 years old in the photograph. I'm sitting cross-legged on the floor along with cousins my age, year older, year younger. On the divan is my mother, her mother, and her mother. I realized that my great-grandmother, who was maybe, I forgot the year, but she was born a slave. And so the question, it struck me, slavery is not that far away. A person who was a slave loved me and held me. A person who was born as another human being's property loved me, corrected me, embraced me, and I am touched by that touch right now.
It touches all of us. It touches us whether we're black or white, because all of our ancestors were involved in it, one way or another. And you know, that history carries through to today. We tend to think of, you know, we're here in this sort of point in time in history, and that what went on 300 years ago or 200 years ago or 100 years ago isn't that relevant to today. We sort of, in this digital age, you know, we think we're at this particular data point, and all those other data points along the path have no meaning. But we really live in an analog world, not a digital world, and all of those data points get us to where we are now. And the challenge for us is to, it seems to me, reconcile that history with the present so that we can move forward. It seems to me that many of the issues that confront us today as it relates to race are the result of the present effects of that past conduct, the present effects of slavery. They exist, they are real. The present effects of the Jim Crow South, even though we've moved away from the colored only and white only signs, and all of us can now ride the bus either in the front or the back as we choose, as opposed to being relegated to the back of the bus or denied, I was going to say denied the right to vote, There is an effort afoot today to deny people of color the right to vote, and we have to come to grips with those effects that cause us to be where we are today, so that we can go forward. I'm not one that spends a whole lot of time looking in the rearview mirror, but to the extent that you want to go forward, you have to. And I think it behooves all of us to take a hard look at who we are, where we come from, the role that our ancestors played in developing this country, making the country what it is today, and figuring out how do we go forward so that everyone, all of the people here, are treated fairly, treated equally, and receive justice. It's, the path has never been easy. It wasn't easy in the past. It's not easy today, but it's a path we have to take.
And it requires kind of a faith and an optimism. Is that correct? You have to kind of believe it's doable.
It requires a faith, an optimism, hope, and intent. We have to be intentional about it. We can't just wait for it to happen or wait for somebody else to do it or expect somebody else to do it. We have to be intentional about going forward in a way that ensures everyone is treated fairly.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest is the former Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Alan Page, his wife Diane Sims Page, and his daughter, their daughter, Georgina Page Smith. And they're here to make you aware of a wonderful project that includes an exhibit, their collection. The collection is called TESTIFY, and it's being presented now through February 6th at the Minneapolis Public Library. I think it's called Hennepin County Public Library now, but it's at Minneapolis Central 300 Nicollet Mall in downtown Minneapolis, and there's a reception there. Again, Georgina, I want to invite people as well to the reception again. And
yeah, the reception is open to the public on Thursday. It'll be from 7 to 8. There will be live music and snacks, and we're just really excited to invite the community out to come and join us and celebrating and experiencing this exhibit.
Do we have a gospel choir coming? Do you remember the name?
We have a gospel group coming. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it's 4 amazing women that will be singing to sort of open the reception to the public.
Yeah. And then on January 31st, Justice Page is going to be presenting a talk, and the talk is titled "Testify." It's not about the flag or the anthem; it's about justice, and that's such a powerful idea. The concept is a great.
Well, we have this controversy about players protesting, and the controversy has lost sight of the underlying reason for their protest. And it's interesting to me, Paul Laurence Dunbar, not Paul Laurence Dunbar, now I'm blanking. Paul Robeson.
Paul Robeson.
Okay.
Paul Robeson, and I'm paraphrasing here, essentially said, the answer to injustice is not to criticize the critic. The answer is to end the injustice. And what we've got a little bit going on is a focus on the critic. And intentionally or not, being used as a vehicle to ignore the injustice.
And to further divide the country. I mean, it's insidious.
Absolutely.
It's really it's insidious, I think, and it's a shame. But it's what's going on right now. So I think this is so timely, and to hear your take, your voice, and your analysis, I think is important because you represent the highest achievement in the profession and also in the law. And as a Supreme Court justice in Minnesota, I think no one can speak more eloquently and more forthrightly to the issue of the reason athletes are protesting, and to the issue of the effort to obscure the reason for the protest, to shift the narrative away from why there is a call for justice. And you're saying it is about justice.
It's about justice and the end of injustice.
Mm-hmm.
There are those, I'm sure, who say, injustice, that's all in the past. Let's move on. We don't need to rehash all that. It's not about rehashing anything. In our criminal justice system,
mm-hmm.
people of color are stopped more often,
mm-hmm.
arrested more often, charged more often, tried more often, convicted more often, given longer sentences than a similarly situated white person. There is something fundamentally wrong when the branch of our government that is designed to ensure equal justice under law. Mm-hmm. Indeed, those are the words that are etched in the facade of the United States Supreme Court building, equal justice under law.
Mm-hmm.
When that branch of government persistently and consistently denies people of color fair and equal treatment. So we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go.
Great comment. Diane, add to that if you would.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Well, Al, we'd like to invite you to come down to see the exhibit, and Alan and I would be happy to give you a personal tour. We're very excited about it. It feels like after 20 to 30 years of collecting, this just feels like the birth and just a very joyous, exciting time to be able to share our collection with the general public. So we're very excited about that. And I want to give a shout out to daughter Georgie, who's been the project manager and basically has put together this exhibit. She's just done a phenomenal job. She's done
an incredible job.
She's done all the brainstorming. She thought of the name Testify for
mm-hmm.
the branding.
Mm-hmm.
She's written all the didactics. She's just been phenomenal.
It's easy for us to heap praise upon her because she's our daughter.
Right.
But in fact,
she did the work.
She not only did the work, but did it extremely well.
That's wonderful.
Extremely well. I should just note one other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the objects that are in the show, or at least many of the objects that we have collected, I had in my chambers at the Minnesota Judicial Center
mm-hmm.
as a daily reminder that we haven't always been fair. And so that, sometimes you've had a long day and you're tired and you sort of say to yourself, well, that's good enough. Well, until it gets right, it's not good enough. Until it's fair,
mm-hmm.
it's not good enough. And I use those, some of those artifacts as a reminder to ensure that I never forgot.
So let me ask you how you advise people that you come in contact with, people that listen to your presentations, who read your work or follow your career, about the spirit of active and intentional action. I think you used intentionality as required. And how do people maintain, I think you described it already, but the spirit within to be intentional? You just said that those artifacts around you keep you grounded and keep you focused and charged. But as often as not, even our friends in leadership and in power have this idea that they don't want this conversation.
It's hard work.
And so they want Al McFarlane to sort of back up, back down, don't bring it up, don't make me uncomfortable because I didn't do it. That's what one of our county commissioners told me, and I usually shout him out because he was wrong for saying it. But
Well, you know, the fact is, I mean, I think there's a good argument that he didn't do it,
mm-hmm.
but his ancestors did.
Yes.
And understanding that allows us to understand that the present effects of what those ancestors did is our responsibility.
And yeah, not only that, I mean, there's a way that that whole system was put in place. I mean, through our, our laws. There are still some laws on the books that about miscegnation, or someone was saying there are sundown towns still in Minnesota that still have these laws on the books that no black people can be in town after 6 p.m. Otherwise, the police have a legitimate reason to pull them over and harass them. Those laws are still on the books. And so even though this is such a common defense or a crouch from people who say, ugh, more victimhood, this wasn't me, this was our ancestors. And it's just, we're all, even black people, and to some degree, complicit in this system of hegemony that we've inherited, and we need to look at it and fight it. And there's so many different ways and strategies to do that. So find a way that you're comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with, taking responsibility for the institution of slavery, look at ways in your life today that you might be complicit in the system that was established by slavery.
We're going to be talking to Cale Severson later on the show. He's recently elected to the Minneapolis Park Board. A young, in my mind, activist, a committed neighborhood organizer and worker who's been out there a long time in his young life. But I wanted to ask you, Justice Page, advice you have for the Cale Seversons, for the Jeremiah Ellisons, for the new fourth precinct, Fourth Ward City Council member Philippe Cunningham, to Mayor St. Paul, Mayor Carter, as a seasoned and retired elected official. What's your advice? How do you encourage them to do the best work they can do?
Well, first of all, I encourage everybody who holds public office to understand that it's public office. We are in positions of public office to serve the public. The second thing is that it's all too easy to be distracted by those things on the fringes and lose sight of what it is we really want to do. I would also note that it's easy to raise one's voice and draw attention to the problem. It's far more difficult to work through the difficult, sometimes boring, very challenging steps that it takes to bring about change. And if we're going to bring about change, we have to take those steps. And the thing that I learned from a friend who used to be a Minneapolis City Council person. This was back in the 70s and 80s. He was really good at what he did because he learned the rules and figured out how to use them to accomplish what he wanted. I mean, we, live in a world and a society governed by rules that keep us in place, but also can be used to help us advance. If you think about Thurgood Marshall and the law, the rules that he was challenging, he had to figure out, he and all the host of other phenomenal lawyers who brought us Brown versus the Board of Education, all the cases that preceded that and came after. he had to figure out how to take that law, turn it in on itself to accomplish the end of state-sponsored segregation. Law that was hostile as could be to that end. But yet, they not only figured out what the rules were and how to take advantage of them, but then had the, for lack of a better way to describe it, the stick-to-itiveness to follow it through to the very end. We live at a time when we want instant answers and instant results. Well, that's not always going to happen. And we have to have the perseverance, the patience, and the, as I said earlier, acting with intent to get from where we are today to where we want to be in the future.
How do we change the expectation? How do we illuminate the potential? How do we create a vocabulary in our community that allows us to describe different, more productive, more effective outcomes for ourselves, our families, and for humanity?
Well, I think it begins with the fact that there's a tendency to think that we're powerless, but each of us and every one of us has the power to bend the arc of history. Some maybe bend it a little more than others, but each of us have that ability to bend that arc in a way that makes the future better and brighter than it is today. And again, once you understand that, and once you understand that if you act with intent, you have the power to bring about change. You have the power to change the future.
It's intent and it's integrity, right? Like, and I was actually thinking as you were speaking, Dad, so I studied theater for a little while, and one of the biggest tools of the actor is your imagination. And they always tell you to be a good actor, you have to live truthfully in imaginary circumstances. And so not to say that this is something that, we're going to be pretending or acting or pretending to do, but if you can imagine those circumstances of the future, then you can live yourself in, you can project and live yourself into, like project yourself into those circumstances and work your way into it if you can imagine it and live it truthfully.
A phrase I heard over the past several years, Justice Page, is one that I think that we probably need to be intentional in creating dialogue around it in our community, is the rule of law. The description of Western civilization, of democracy, of advanced society right now, in the West in particular, is that of organized societies committed to, first and foremost, the rule of law. That presents an opportunity for equality for all of the participants and residents. Does that make sense to you, first of all?
We have to give, absolutely. I mean, the rule of law is how we order ourselves as a society. Otherwise, it's anarchy.
And how do we create awareness so it's intentional and understood and felt and therefore lived with intention by ordinary people? Where does that language come from? How do we create that?
I think we create it within ourselves, is getting to that understanding. Those of us who are leaders, and I put that in quotes, have some responsibility to share with everyone our experiences and the things that we've done so that they can see the possible. And not only, my sense is that once people see the possible, they not only fulfill their possibilities, but expand the possible. And I think all of us have that obligation.
Justice Page, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I love talking to you. I love listening to you. So I want to thank you so much for what you're doing. And I'll let you end on this, ask you to end on this note. You talk about actualizing or creating intention, reflecting intentionality. I think nothing does that more than the Page Scholars, your commitment to education. So you are doing what you say, and you're launching into the world people that are trained and committed, who have decided that with your help, and they can be change agents in humanity.
With our help, those of us who have been involved in creating the Page Education Foundation, but also with their help, because one of our requirements for our Page grants is that our grant recipients, we call them Page Scholars, that they give of themselves, talking with young children, kindergarten through 8th grade, about the importance and value of education, working with them as tutors, mentors, and role models. Benefit to those young children, benefit to our scholars, benefit to the community at large. I mean, you ask, how do we talk about it? One of the ways we talk about it is doing it.
That's right. Justice Page, thank you so much. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My thanks to the Honorable Justice, former Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Alan Page, and his family. His wife is here, Diane Sims Page. Diane, thank you so much. And their daughter, Georgina Page Smith. Thank you. Georgina, close with you making the invitation one more time. Let people know and invite them to enjoy this wonderful project.
We just want everyone to know that everyone is welcome. It's in a gallery, so sometimes people feel intimidated, but everyone is welcome to come and experience this exhibit, and we hope everyone will. It's at the public library. The reception will be Thursday night from 7 to 8, and we're going to have a gospel quartet. Their name is Sevi. I looked it up. And there will be snacks and refreshments, and the gallery will be open for viewing. So we hope people will come down.
And if you can't be there Thursday night,
it's up through the 6th.
It's up through the 6th of February.
Great, and you're going to be speaking. You're presenting. Talk about that real quickly.
January 31st at 2 p.m. in the library's auditorium.
Thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Thank you for having us.
Sure. Thank you.
You want to get a picture out with everybody?
Huh?
Get a picture?
You want to do it?
Yeah.
Hold it.
You got time?
Just a second. Hold it.
On how to support their mission.
Let's see how, make sure I got it.
The state of Minnesota Governor's Council celebrates the life of Martin Luther